Good afternoon. Sorry to have kept you waiting. My name is John Herbst, and I'm the director of the Dinu Patrizia Eurasia Center. We've got a somewhat unusual event for you this afternoon. We're going to talk about the Russian diaspora, why there is a Russian diaspora, and we have an excellent panel to do that. We have Evgenia Chirikova, and I'm not going to read her bio because you all have a sheet and we want to get to the conversation. We have Dr. Sergei Yerofeyev. We have Mr. Mikhail Kokorich. And we have, of course, our own Alina Dr. Polyakova. Very interesting, if it's a somewhat wonky subject, but it's a wonky subject to give you insight into a much larger question regarding what's going on in Russia today. And with that, we'll start. I should just mention that we are at Russia Factor. The hashtag is Russia Factor if you're following us on Twitter. And with that, we'll start. And it's a Davos forum, so I'll be asking questions of our panelists, and then we'll have a chance for the audience to ask questions as well. So I'd like to start with Alina. If you could give us some sense regarding the numbers coming out of Russia since Mr. Putin took over, and the broad pictures.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the reason we're having this event is because many of us who have been observing just casually in our own experience have noticed that many cities in the United States and many specific sectors in the United States often have a lot of Russian speakers in them. Some of our guests are from the Bay Area. They can speak to this. I spent some time there as well, and it seems to me the entire tech sector is becoming a Russian-speaking sector. And we have to ask ourselves why. Are we really seeing more and more people leaving Russia, or is this part of a much older immigration from the Soviet Union? But actually, if we look at the numbers, these are official numbers that are kept by the Russian Federation, the Russian Statistics Service, Federal State Statistics Service. Between 2000 and 2014, so since Putin took office in 2000 for the first time, approximately 1.5 to 1.8 million Russians left Russia under his watch. And this trend has only intensified since 2012. So we're now in Putin's third term, official third term. And since that time, since 2012, according to Russia's own statistics, the number of Russians has skyrocketed, those who are leaving. In just 2013, 2014, almost 500,000 Russians left the Russian Federation. And if we think about Russia, it's not a huge country. The population there is already declining because of demographic problems. And the fact that you have this out-migration is a significant, I think, national security threat to the Russian Federation. And a lot of the anecdotal evidence that we've been seeing, reporting interviews with these individuals, some of them are here with us today, is that they're qualitatively different than those who left during the Soviet days. Of course, the largest immigration wave happened in the early 90s when the Soviet Union fell apart. And there are estimates that 800,000 scientists, so highly skilled, highly trained individuals left Russia since 1991. But what we're seeing is that these numbers of the highly skilled, the well-educated, basically the very individuals who should be staying in Russia to build the economy, diversify the economy, to make it a successful economic power, a great power in the economic sense, those are the individuals that are abandoning their country. And it is our suspicion that this will be, over time, the number one threat to the Russian Federation as it seeks to gain its foothold in the world again. So that's just to start us off. These are the kind of numbers we're seeing. I think they're troubling. We can argue a bit about the statistics, of course, but it is our hypothesis and our hunch that many of those who are leaving are not leaving because of the Soviet days when there was a lot of repression and censorship. They're leaving because they have no economic opportunities to use their skills. And this is going to be detrimental to the Russian Federation.
Alina, thank you very much. I'd like to now ask Evgenia, are people in Russia, as far as you know, familiar with this problem? Are they aware of the numbers leaving? What do they think about this if they do?
I think that really a horrible problem for Russia, that a lot of people recently move in Western countries, in America and Europe. But I think that it's not so big problem now because time change, and in last century it was a horrible process. But now we have a best possibility to continue to help our motherland. And many immigrants can continue to support Russian civil society and be more effective in the West. And let me introduce some examples. In this audience, I saw my best friend Natasha Budaeva, Masha Kanevskaya, who continue them struggle and continue be effective. And my modest experience, and I think that it's not so big problem. It's very good that we Russian people have a chance to move and continue our activity. And I think that we need now support from European and American civil society because we have a problem with monstrous system. I mean Kremlin system, I mean KGB monstrous system, and of course we need your support for be effective.
All right. What sort of support can Western civil society give?
For me.
Yes, for you.
First of this supporting, of course, its voice, because a huge problem in Russia that we don't have independent media. And I remind for you situation with Ildar Dadin. It's a very famous activist, and I exposed for you situation with Ildar. He was very brave, and he stayed with pickets in middle of Moscow with transparent against war in Ukraine. And he was arrested and imprisoned, and he tortured in prison. And after that information about tortures against him in prison, was created a huge campaign. And many immigrants started campaign for support Dadin. And many media in America, in Europe, take this topic and help to disseminate this information. And I think that it's very important now in Russia, because recently we have very inspiring trend. We have a very good trend for increasing number of grassroots movement in Russia. And I think that we need to support this activity. Why? Because it's really unusual activity for Russia. Because in Soviet Union time, it was really impossible to create grassroots activity. And this process started in 2010. If it's needed, I can explain why it's started, this process. And now we have dozens of grassroots groups in Russia. And if you want to find more information about this trend, you can find our portal, activatica.org, and find map with a lot of points. And each of these points on the map of Russia, it's a different kind of social or environmental activity. And for us, very important support in America, in Europe. And it's very important if you help us to disseminate information, because we don't have independent media. It's first. And second, of course, we need a normal tools against corruptioners in Russia. And very important that you, American, adopt Magnitsky Act. It was very effective. It was very good. And we need help with investigation. And I have a dream, one type of support. Of course, it's really very difficult, but unfortunately, Western countries continue to sell oil, gas, and other fossil fuel from Russia. And what to do, Mr. Putin and his team, with this money? They spend this money for wars, they spend this money for propaganda, and they pay for this money for aggressive repression against Russian civil society. And I think that it's very important for European and American society to change them energy policy and use normal green energy and stop buy oil and gas from a dictatorship regime.
All right. Thank you very much. What you described is essentially a political problem, and you're looking support for dealing with that political problem. But I think the issue of the emigration is not just, and maybe not even principally, a political problem as opposed to an economic one. And I'd like to now turn to Mikhail. You're a businessman. You chose to leave Russia. Was that a natural decision for you given the circumstances you faced?
Yeah, I think the race of entrepreneurial migration from Russia to United States somehow is pretty good sign actually for Russia, and it's pretty normal process. I mean, definitely we face in Russia after like roaring 2000s, after these 10 years of the period of the exceptional growth, where dozens and hundreds of thousands of people created their own business, there's some period of stagnation. And many of these entrepreneurs made a decision to move the entrepreneurial activity outside of Russia. And this new wave of migration is pretty new and unique to what we see with the previous waves of migration. And for example, we've lived by a few years in Bay Area. We actually see this like a slices of migration, like geological, different geological eras, like the old migration, then people who came in the 90s just to work for tech companies. And now it's like it's a absolutely new generation of the migrants, the people who came to US to realize their ideas.
Their business ideas.
Business ideas. They bring not only ideas, they bring their own money. The connection how to raise this money from also like Russian and Eastern European sources. They also bring like ties with the Russian high-tech community because, I mean, if you're a Chinese entrepreneur, you probably use with like a Chinese labor to make, for example, your software. If you're Indian, you work with Bangalore. And if you're Russian, you probably work with the people who is in Moscow and Novosibirsk and other cities. And I think it's an extremely good sign for Russia, for current Russia and for future Russia, and for civil society in Russia. Because these ties between the migration and between entrepreneurs who is living on the Western world and pretty tightly integrated with companies and with peoples in Russia, it helps first of all to show that like the life is different what it's shown by state TV, state media on the Western world, and actually it's source for potential growth also of Russian economic in future.
You just said something very interesting that hadn't struck me before. You said these entrepreneurs coming out of Russia maintain their contacts back in, as you put it, Moscow or Novosibirsk. So in effect, your activity, well, in some cases, Russian entrepreneurial activity in Germany or the United States is employing Russians back in Russia. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not dozens, it's hundreds of the thousands of high-tech Russian engineers, software developers in Russia, not only in Russia, in Ukraine, in Belarus, they are working for companies who's mostly founded by, let's say, again, Russian-speaking entrepreneurs. Right. I'm not dividing like a Russian out of Ukrainians or Belarusian. It's the same. Like hundreds of, maybe millions. I mean, it's the huge numbers of high-tech companies in Russia. One of examples, for example, the Luxoft. Luxoft, the company that actually on the New York Stock Exchange. And they are making a lot of software for like BMW, Mercedes, John Deere. And they have several thousands software developers in Russia, in Ukraine, in all CIS countries. And it's like a...
And is all the work that's being done in Russia and Ukraine, elsewhere, being done long distance? Or do you, for example, go there and there are meetings and such?
Yeah, it depends on if it's like small company, they just like working on some remote basis with small teams and even employ people directly, paying money directly to engineers. But the larger company with let's say more than 100 employees and it's probably thousands of the company of this size, they definitely have their own subsidiary or like contractors who is working for them. So and it's like it's pretty active flow of the people. You can like take any flights from Moscow to Los Angeles or to New York. You will see a lot of people who is like traveling with just business needs.
Right. The reason I asked that question is this is an economic activity, an important economic activity, which has really not been affected by the difficult relations between Washington and Moscow. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean this economic activity, because it's not about market. Somehow, let's say, for example, in one line of our business where it's involved satellite technology, it's definitely affected because of export control, export law. But if you are talking about software development, it's not affected. So it's the transactions, is pretty open.
Okay, thank you. Sergey, you're a sociologist. You can talk about these trends with great learning. Are there specific traits of the people who are coming out of Russia these days to settle again in Germany and Britain and the United States?
These themes have been around for a while now, especially since 3-4 years ago. And one of particular examples of publicizing certain data is the publication by Stratfor. And many people now quote a diagram which shows very clearly how the out-migration rates significantly dropped with the beginning of Putin's era from 2001, 2002, and how they started to radically climb from 2011 and especially 2012. So there are sociologists who don't very much question this, but the critical approach, both in this country and in Russia, means that you should really look at that very carefully. The famous Levada Center, the pollster, which is considered to be more independent, not entirely, but more independent in the country, they say that the numbers don't even matter so much. What matters is the quality. What is behind those figures, which do not practically change too much from year to year in the last 3 years. And the same has been expressed by a colleague of mine from the university in Moscow where I worked, the director of the Institute of Demography, who said that basically what you see is not so dramatic. But what is dramatic really, and this is also testified by people like Leonid Bershitsky of Bloomberg, his last year's publication on the Russian immigration, that the profound changes, the loss of quality of human capital in Russia is still going on, and maybe even more dramatically than any period before. Asking your question, John, what is the mark of this or that wave of out-migration from Russia? It's also pretty often named like, you know, the late Soviet, early post-Soviet migration was mostly ethnic. When those Jews and Germans and Turks and Greeks who wanted to leave the country, they left as early as late 1980s, early 1990s. The next period of migration, which was very significant, but then dropped after the 1998 crisis, so within 3 years after that, there was a significant drop. But before that, that out-migration mostly consisted of people who wanted to change their economic opportunities because the country was in a dismal economic situation for many people who had knowledge, skills, and had some means to leave the country. So what happened very soon after that crisis, in 1998, so 1999, the economy started to pick up, and what I noticed was that some people started to return, those from this country, from Israel, from Germany. There was a significant reverse flow of people who wanted to establish their businesses because some regulations were relaxed at the moment. And there were some hopes that the country will pick up. And the taxation reform was also very important at that period, the early 2000s. But soon people started to realize that you can't get very much out of that, and especially from 2011. And that's quite a true statement, that the change of the political climate in the country significantly affected those who wanted to leave but didn't do that for some reason before, or those who didn't want to leave but could no longer continue with their normal economic activities or working in the knowledge economy.
Okay, now you're the second person on this panel who said 2010, 2011 was a critical moment for increasing emigration. Why do you think that is?
No, well, 2011, 2012,
Okay.
I would say. And we know that 2011 marks, in the Russian political culture, a very important moment when Medvedev, then the president, announced at the United Russia Party Congress that he hands over the power back to Putin. And that's for what very large proportion of people involved in the new industries and knowledge economy were not prepared. The so-called creative class started to revolt internally. And soon after the crackdown on that movement, which basically failed in 2012, with the new introduction of new repressive legislation, it became clear that you can't really continue in the context of growing corruption, and not only corruption. So it's a two-sided threat. Okay. On the one hand, you have that growing economic uneasiness, but on the other hand, you don't have the freedom.
Mikhail and Evgeny, would you agree with that? That is the reason why we've seen the uptick over the past 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's too simple, like to explain this economic migration only by tightening political system. I mean, entrepreneurs, people pretty cynical. They can work in any political system, in China, India, like in Russia. In order to understand like what dramatic change was in like 5 years ago, it was following. I mean, if you look back in the 2000s, this is like 10 years. This was 10 years of the huge, enormous growth in Russian economy. Actually, many industries was created just from the scratch. If you come to 1999, in Russia, for example, domestic retail didn't exist. The production of fast-moving consumer goods was like all the stuff was only imported. Russia imported like the food. Now it's one of the largest exporters. So during these 10 years, the growth in some sectors of economies was dozens of percents per year. You can only compare this with the roaring 20s in the United States. The whole economy was created. And the size of opportunities was so big that people actually tolerated the political risk. They tolerated. I mean, because if you grow in like dozens and dozens, if you can become billionaires in a few years, if you can earn this money, people came back. A lot of migrants with good knowledge of, for example, U.S. like investment market, they moved back and become like a famous Russian investment bankers and started a lot of new businesses. But then, after changes first of all, like the situation is saturated. I mean, this growth cannot be forever. And second, the situation on oil market changed. So this like a oil pump that pumped the Russian economy, they just stopped. And at this time, people start more carefully look on the risks that they have. I mean, because returns become moderate, even like negative. And then you have a choice. Either you invest in Russia with a moderate return, but with a big like future political risk, uncertainty, with a not perfect legal system. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, if you compare with the many CIS countries, it's not bad. If you are not involved in political activity, in most cases, you can consider like pretty good judgment for economic, for example, stuff. But people start to consider, does it make sense to take this risk with a smaller return? And so people start to invest outside and invest not only their money, but also time, entrepreneurial energy, activity, labor.
Alina, please.
I'm sorry, could I actually ask you a follow-up question? I think what you started talking about at the beginning was really interesting about the fact that many of the Russian speakers who then become founders of businesses continue to employ maybe people they knew back in Russia or Belarus or wherever. And do you think, one, the majority of the diversity we see in the tech sector in Russia is a result of this kind of external activity, that there's people from other foreign countries funding jobs in Russia, and there's not that much organic businesses? And my other question for actually all of you then is, how is this different than, let's say, any company hiring programmers, cheap labor in Vietnam, Thailand? Is there a profoundly different dynamic?
Yeah, I think the main difference of Russian high-tech high-tech sector out of like many other countries, even European, that is pretty self-sustained. I mean, if you look on a internet sector in Russia, especially in like when it was like the maximum rate of development, it was pretty large in comparing with any like European markets. Like the biggest Russian IT companies, high-tech companies, was like Yandex, Mail.ru, VKontakte. They're considerably big because of the Cyrillic language. I mean, this like a Cyrillic, several hundred, couple hundred, 200, 300 million people in the Cyrillic languages area. And the people who worked in these companies, who started these companies, who observed these companies, these people become high-tech entrepreneurs. Many people from Yandex, many people from other companies, Mail.ru, software guys, like business guys. This is like the fuel that actually then start to fuel all this like Russian high-tech industry.
And for me, it's really very interesting what say Mikhail and Sergey. It's really very interesting because I never control who left Russia. It was not so interesting for me long time. And for me, it's new information and it's really very interesting. Thank you. I check who left Russia, I mean political activists. And I know then my friend, political activist, left Russia after react of Putin regime for our huge campaign against unfair election in 2012. After this was open a huge number of criminal cases against many activists, and these people need to move in Western countries. It was a question of themselves, safety. And I think that many people from independent NGOs, Russian independent NGOs, needed to move in Western, and some of them became refugees, like Nadia Kutepova from NGO Planet of Hope. She became refugees and she lives now in France. And why they do it? Because was adopted horrible law about foreign agency, and many very respectable and very important Russian NGOs were closed. And of course, people who work in NGO understand it, that it's really very dangerous to stay in Russia. Why? Because I have example how members of NGO, I mean Memorial in Karelia, now stay in prison. I mean Yuri Dmitriev from Karelian Memorial. He stay in Dmitriev. He stay in prison. And I think that political activists and politicians who need to move in Western, it was people who really want to support Russia and really to want to continue the struggle and really want to change regime in Russia. And I think that it's very good because I have very best example about really a good help from political immigrants, immigrants many years ago. I mean immigrants from Estonia. Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union, and a lot of Estonians need to move in Sweden, in other countries, and it was a huge number of population of people, and these people continue to support citizens who stay in Estonia and continue to support people who work against Soviet Union regime. And these people, political immigrants, very help for change regime in Estonia. And when regime was changed, they return in Estonia and help for democracy process in Estonia. And I think it was a very inspiring example for us, immigrants from Russia, because we have a good chance to return in case of stagnation of Putin regime and help for our motherland to change this horrible situation. And I think that it's Estonian, for me, it's very inspiring example.
Okay, you want to jump in?
Well, I
Sergey?
just wanted to say that we're in full accordance with what Mikhail said and what Evgenia says. We really have to differentiate. When we look at the causes and particular the factors connected with the state power in Russia, so that we see that there are certain factors that affect people's economic behavior. And once the situation changes, the conjuncture for the oil prices in the world market changes, as Mikhail says. People start to think about other markets and where they can get better profit. At the same time, the political climate in the country changes. And for everybody, for the social activists, for those who had certain hopes for new civil society in Russia, and also for entrepreneurs. And the third category could be those who work in the knowledge economy, scholars who continue to leave Russia. For everybody, this political climate change was very significant, and you have it kind of very obvious. The other side where we should really differentiate is that there's no just one bulk Russian out-migration. First of all, those who leave Russia don't leave it forever like it happened before the collapse of the Soviet Union. They retain their Russian passports. They very often still have economic ties with the country. They may even continue their joint business with Russia. It's not that easy as it was in the 2000s, but sometimes it continues. So there are different groups of people. Those who leave the country very pessimistic, who don't believe that good times will return, that we ahead of us there lie decades of bad governance and stagnation. So more often people started to talk now about Russia as a second Argentina. Other people think that, I leave the country because I have a better economic opportunity working in Germany or in the United States. I don't think so much about politics. I didn't care so much before. I don't care very much now. But we don't know exactly what is the proportion of those people. And there might be still yet another group of people who are more idealistic. Those who would like to engage in the things which really modernize country, not only economically, like, for example, environmentalists. Evgenia is one example, but there are many other examples, like people in the Krasnodar Krai, in the Russian North Caucasus, which suffered from real political repression in the area of environmental control, and when they tried to fight corruption in the Russian North Caucasus, and really faced severe repression on the grounds that they tried to protect the environment against the corruption. So there are multiple examples of that. So this third category of people is very diverse, and you should really further differentiate within that group. Okay, if you want to understand the character of this current out-migration from Russia.
Alina wants to jump in. Let me ask one question before I turn the floor to her. It's clear we're hearing from, you might say, a political perspective on this panel and from a business or an entrepreneurial perspective. Different reasons for people leaving. is there serious interaction between the political side and the business side and the diaspora here?
Yeah, I think it definitely will be simplification to tell that the reason for entrepreneurs to find like new opportunities abroad only economical. We definitely also like they feel the overall like deterioration of situation. Especially it's like you can feel it after like Medvedev terms that when we had the hopes, and when I've been in almost all Bolotnaya meetings, and so I saw a lot of my friends, entrepreneurs, like businessmen, even like pretty rich guys, like pretty rich guys, and we all was pissed off with the situation, with what's happening, and we all felt that our country was stolen. I think we were not fully like right, because nobody promised to give us back our country even during the Medvedev term. But the overall this is like a additional like motivation. It was to consider another opportunities, but probably not primary, but additional pretty strong motivation.
Okay, Alina, you want to?
Right. I think there's also a bigger picture here. We're talking about the details of who makes up the group of this new emigration. And I think the bigger picture to me is that if we look at who was leaving in the 90s and why, there's always push and pull factors, which you were talking about, that drive people to leave and also pull them towards other countries. And I think what's interesting about the difference between the immediate post-Soviet migration, what we're seeing in this new Putin-era migration, is that it is a profound, I think, challenge to the social contract that the Putinist system tried to have with the population, meaning that in the early 1990s, there was mass instability, economic, political. This drove a lot of people out at the end of the day to permanent immigration, not just business immigration. I think now Putin came to power in 2000 on the platform of restoring stability to the country, right? Ensuring economic growth, or at least economic stability, that you won't have the 90s anymore. And I think the social contract was, well, you give up some of your rights in exchange for not repeating the horrors of the 1990s. And I think what we're seeing now is that social contract is crumbling because whatever stability the regime is able to provide, and yes, perhaps it is better than it was in the 1990s in terms of economic stability. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It's failing to keep the people who should be driving the economy forward. And I think this is the profound problem with the regime.
That's an interesting point. Anyone want to comment on that?
Oh.
Yes, well, I totally agree. When you have this great economic attractiveness in the mid-2000s, when the oil prices were continuing to rise, when the effect of tax relaxation was still felt very strongly, and when there was not so many new regulations, there was no foreign agent legislation, when but the corruption continued to grow. Things which was not so easily noticeable by entrepreneurs and citizens in general. So of course there are push and pull factors. And I already brought up the example how some people started to return to conduct business in Russia in the early 2000s. But this broader picture is of course very complex. None of these groups, entrepreneurs or social activists or university professors or young university graduates, none of these groups is just focused on one aspect which pushes or pulls them. It actually calls for serious research, complex research in what is today's Russia's immigration. Of course, we acknowledge that there have been waves, etc., etc. But we are blessed with the opportunity today that we have the most complex, if you want to continue this word, wave of immigration starting in 2012. Because it's so remarkable in numbers, not as remarkable as some figures are quoted sometimes, but more remarkable in its quality. It's the most ambiguous immigration. These are the people who have a whole spectrum of hopes or disappointments in what is going on in Russia or between Russia and other countries. So these are the people who I would dare say are probably the last flash of highly educated people. Because what we are expecting in the future is probably some other kinds of groups of immigrants to the United States, to Western Europe. But that picture will change. They will no longer be that educated. They will no longer have that experience as the people of the 1990s and 2000s. Why I'm saying that? Because the education and science in Russia continue to degrade, despite certain efforts of so-called systemic liberals to conduct some partial reforms. The quality of university training, school training, basically. So you are not going to experience any similar kind of immigration influx from Russia in the future. So this is the unique opportunity, and I think that's very good that you decided to talk about that now, because this so-called wave is the most complex in both its composition of who is on what spectrum of the economic or political. And also within those groups, there are different expectations and different motivations.
You just raised an interesting point that I had not heard before. It's well understood in the West that, for example, Gazprom does not do enough to develop new oil fields, so it's degrading its supply. So its future is going to be not as nice as its present or its past. You're saying the same thing is happening in the area of education. So are you actually saying that the rigor of science education, the rigor of mathematical education in Russia is declining?
Well, it's quite obvious when you look at the quality of high school graduates today. And this unavoidably affects university training. Although in the recent years, the value of engineering and exact sciences university study has increased. But the country does not have those resources. I can easily demonstrate so-called Russian cracks. This is like that. So this is the military and police expenditure going that way. And the expenditure for health, education, all social welfare goes this way. This is the Russian cross. And we don't have any signs that this will improve in the coming years. With the oil prices, the relative budget expenditure on education, research and development has been declining, but the general pie has been shrinking, the state budget. And this is probably not going to change, where even the governmental official acknowledge that we're probably facing many years of stagnation. And this will unavoidably affect the possible future, quality of the possible future out-migration.
Well, recently a senior Russian official spoke about no real improvements in the standard of living until 2035, so 18 years from now.
So you said.
I want a little add, Sergey, because oil and gas, it's my favorite topic because I'm an environmentalist. And I think that a very long time in Russia, when price for oil and gas and other natural resources were very high, a main resource for Russian authorities were not a people, were this nature resource. And now, when price for oil and coal and gas collapsed, Russian authorities have a problem with money, and they need to find ways for enrich themselves. And what the kind of these ways? They find, for example, they adopt unfair taxes system. And result of this unfair taxes system is, Platinum system, it's a big campaign of truck drivers. Because according to this Platon system, truck drivers need to pay for using motorway, highways. And the beneficiary of this Platon system is Arkady Rotenberg and his son. And Arkady Rotenberg, it's a huge Russian oligarch, close friend of Mr. Putin. And the result of this adopt of this Platon system was a huge campaign of truck drivers. And now they plan to organize a huge strike. And another example of activity Russian authorities is adopt different destroying green zones and national parks for infrastructure and development. And the result, ordinary citizens, ordinary people lose them green zones, lose them normal type of life. And what to do ordinary people? They decide to answer for authorities and organize many, many grassroots groups. And I think that it's a bad situation with economy in Russia. It's a very good possibility for Russian civil society. And I think that new immigrants from Russia during the time to started to support this trend in Russia. Of course, now our immigrants, Russian immigrants, are very atomizated. But I think that during the time, step by step, political immigrants started to organize a campaign and foundations and campaigns to support process in motherland, in Russia. And I think it's really a very inspiring trend.
Okay, what you've just said is, this is your hope that the people who've come out of Russia will pay attention to Russia, provide resources to do this work. But is this more a hope or is this a reality? Has this happened or is this something you're hoping to happen in the future? I'm asking you and then we'll turn to the others.
May I,
okay,
I would
jump in.
Support Evgenia in that, and actually continuing my previous point, that this is the unique moment in history. We never had this kind of Russian immigration
By
in the
you say
West.
this type, you mean high quality?
Well, we had high quality. Part of the early 1990s immigration was also high quality. When some people say that those were people who were not very skilled, it's not entirely true.
Okay.
There was some. It was mixed.
Okay.
Now it's true. The majority of those leaving are socially active, not only economically but also socially active. They are disappointed in the general political climate in the country. So these are the people, and there is a limited, finite number of such people, you know, and this flow will not continue for very long. So these are the people who retain very strong ties with the country because they have gone through very important emotional drama. They have gone through certain changes in their economic life. So they're, in a way, much more flexible. And of course, when you look back at the early 1990s immigration from Russia, those people definitely will have much weaker ties with the country. They're much more integrated into the lives of other countries. They have already children who have grown in other countries. But these people, of different ages, by the way, some of them are just university graduates, some of them are successful entrepreneurs who are just about 40 years old. And there are also those people who are not too old yet, but very experienced, like 60 years university professors, who decided to immigrate before they totally retire. So it's a very interesting mixture of those who still retain very strong emotional information links, family links with the country, which is no longer lost for them forever like it was 30 years ago. So it's a totally different situation. So I would agree that understanding these people better, talking to them, and trying to figure out in what way they want to support is extremely important for those who still live in Russia, who fight in Russia, who want better future for Russian education, for Russian health system, for Russian entrepreneurship and everything. So this is a unique moment, and I think it never was there before. Maybe in some totally different form in the 19th century, in the times of Herzen's journal called The Bell, the famous first emigrant ethics developed by those closely associated with the Russian great literature of the 19th century. So this is the unique moment in history when we can turn attention of these people, talk to them, and figure out how they can actually help those grassroots processes which are going on right now. One particular very bright example is the political campaign for presidency of Alexei Navalny, the one who actually uses the phrase beautiful future Russia. So it's one of the ideological markers, not liberal, not conservative, but just, very similar to what Martin Luther King used to say, I have a dream. So this is the time when Russia has a dream carried by a growing proportion of younger people. So when you look at the gatherings around regional Navalny centers in places like Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Samara, etc., you see young people. And you realize that it's actually true that Navalny's campaign is financed by these people, and those people who do not come, but those who really create this new opportunity. So there is something new out there in Russia of which this new Russian immigration here is not probably fully aware.
Okay, I've just got to know what it really is to start the audience Q&A, but I want to ask one more question to our resident entrepreneur. Mikhail, would you agree that the business folks coming out of Russia are in fact paying close attention to what's going on at home and are supporting the interest of the political activists here?
Yeah, I think this is like definitely the distinctive difference between these waves of immigration and our older, not older, the another geological era of immigration. So we fully aware what's happening. Sometimes it's like too much aware. Sometimes I just stop me listening like Echo Moskvy and trying to listen some like US TV and radio. But definitely we have our own like a political opinion. We somehow continue like either to support some political movements in Russia by some sponsorship, by participation. So and it's like it's pretty different. And just because we migrated at the age when we already had our own political opinion. And,
okay, thank you. Please.
Thank you, Irv Chapman.
Please identify yourself before you ask the question.
Irv Chapman, I work for Bloomberg. Is it the case that Putin's attitude toward, unlike in the Cold War era when the Iron Curtain prevented anyone from emigrating who didn't like the system, is it the case that Putin's attitude is, if you don't like what I'm doing, go with God anywhere that will accept you? And also in the Cold War era, diaspora from Eastern Europe and the United States was a political force for anti-communism. Is there any chance that the diaspora of Russians will be a political force in the United States to keep the sanctions going and press for democracy in Russia?
Anyone want to try this question?
Well, I can take it. Definitely we live in a different world today. And it's even very often said that Putin could be possibly interested in as many people live in the country as possible. If you're critical of the regime, just you're free to go. It's a totally different question whether those who have left want to do something about Russia. I don't think that there will be a huge proportion of those who have left who will actively engage in changing Russia and helping those Russians who stay behind. But this proportion can be very significant. Very significant.
I would also add that just to this earlier point on this being a really diverse and complex emigration, I also think it's a profound difference from the Soviet days, where people that could get out were dissidents. They're political dissidents, many of them, I think much more than now, because it was rare to be able to get out until the mid to late 80s, when primarily Jews were able to leave. And so I think now, and this is again just based on reporting, there are many in the new diaspora who are not political, right? They're not de facto against Putin. They may be against the fact that they can't do their business in an effective way in Russia, but who cares? I can just go to the U.S., I can go to Germany, I can go to Israel, and still employ people that I know and keep up and travel back and forth. So it's not a political force in the same sense that I think was the situation during the Soviet days, because it's a much more complex wave.
Okay.
And I want a little add, because I want to add what I think important point. We have a different regime in Soviet Union and now, because of course 100 years ago in 1917 power in my country, in Russia, was seized by terrorist group. Them called themselves Red Terror. And imagine then power take a group like ISIS and take this power during 70 years. It was monstrous experiment, and result was this experience was mass repressions and killed and tortured, and many millions of people was killed. But now, unfortunately, leader of Russia, it's a man from same terrorist organization, from KGB. But situation changing now. Why? Because Putin and his friends keep the money in Western countries. In Europe, in America, they buy luxuries in America, buy yachts and beautiful houses in America, in England, in Europe. And mission you immigrants, you political migrants, to work with this situation, to prepare investigation against this corrupted scheme. And I think then a Western country is really very comfortable place for political activists to kick offshore stomach of Putin regime. And I think it's a very good place. And I am very happy because we prepare investigation about corrupted scheme in our case, in our movement, because we find, I little explain for you for understandable, we have a horrible project, highway through Khimki forest. And we find how our taxes, we Russian citizens, pay for concessionaire of this project, company 1C, it's a French company. And this French company disseminates this money in different offshore zones. And one of this offshore company, there is in Cyprus. And the owner of this company is Arkady Rotenberg. And we, with our colleague NGO from France, prepare investigation and prepare a lawsuit about this corrupt scheme and send this lawsuit in French prosecutor. And now, first time in our history, our new history, was open a criminal case in French prosecutor and started police investigation against Putin and 1C company. And I think it's a first example. And I think that its process continue to grow. And another activist started to open criminal case against Russian corruptioners.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we had a question over here. Where did you get the microphone?
Abdul Ghaffar Mughal. I'm a homeless academic, meaning independent scholar. I have three comments on the presentation. Number one, it seems to me that we are making heavy weather of the.
You might want to speak louder or put the microphone closer. It's hard to hear.
It seems to me that we may be making heavy weather of emigration from Russia. Over the last decade or so, the labor market is is more and more global in nature. People are educated and highly skilled people are moving across countries more often than they used to be. Also, and I've been working in the Middle East for the last 4, 5, 6 years, and I see more and more Russians working in the United Arab Emirates. It's not only the West. Many countries have attracted Russian brain and Russian skills. So the emigration of Russian can be looked from this perspective, just part of the global wave of increasing immigration of highly skilled and highly educated people as the labor market is becoming more integrated and globalized. Point number two, the characterization of the emigration as if there is a brain drain from Russia is probably not accurate because there's so much interaction, so much back and forth movement. It's more like circulation. Even people who emigrated from Russia on a semi-permanent basis, it's like Russia is creating a hedge fund which they can draw upon when things improve, when political, economic situation improves there. With the fall in the oil price, the oil revenue has declined, and as Alina mentioned, that the social contract has been crumbling. Okay, and the gap in the expected wage rate in Russia and other global market has increased, and that has attracted, pushed many people to seek better opportunities elsewhere. And when I say expected wage rate, I mean not only the wage rate, but also the probability of finding a job. So the opportunities have dwindled, and that has pushed many Russians to seek opportunities outside. The third point I would like to make is that a lot of this emigration has been back to the Central Asian countries from where a lot of these migrants. Russia is a major immigrant country. With the fall in the oil price, opportunities in Russia dwindle, and not only for Russia, but also for immigrants from Central Asia.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What is your question?
The question is the following. I don't see much detail in terms of who are the people who are emigrating, what is their education and skill profile, where they are going, so is there any significant difference between the current wave, and the wave that emigrated earlier to characterize the current emigration as something qualitatively different from the other? That's my question. So I don't see a lot of breakdown or detail in terms of the skill composition.
I think as some of us have said, there are qualitative differences between the waves, particularly the wave that left in the immediate post-Soviet period in the 1990s and those that are leaving now in terms of their socioeconomic background, maybe not their educational background, but certainly their economic standing in society, and probably also their political views. But I think the big issue here is that we don't know that much about this new wave. It's relatively new. And we've seen some reporting based on interviews with specific individuals, but this has not been, I would say, broad enough to be able to draw really conclusive assumptions based on it, because it's difficult to track people. It's very difficult to track people. We do have information that is anecdotal at the moment, that these are qualitatively different waves of immigration. And I don't know if you want to add to that, Sergey.
Okay. Because let's move on to the next question. You're right that there's not enough data. There's a fair amount of information, which especially Sergey and Alina pointed to. But this is a teaser. We're going to be doing a study on this.
Correct.
And come back in about 18 months, and we will have serious data looking at this. Now, with that, I see 3 questions. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and we'll take them all together because it's about 12 minutes left, and then we'll answer them as a group. So please.
Hi, my name is MJ Crawford, State Department. My question is, are there any current tensions that exist between Russians that have chosen to move abroad and Russians that have chosen to either stay in Russia or were not able to choose to stay?
Okay.
And just wanted to know if in 5 years the Estonia example happens in Russia, to what degree is Ukraine's early days with taking Ukrainian Americans and bringing them into government, to what degree might that be an example?
Okay. Thank you. Then question in the back, and then over here on the side.
My name is Yuri Terikov. I am an editor of Rufabula. There is not a secret that we Russians do not trust each other, and that's why we do not organize in a stable and big diasporas abroad. Do you have that fear that this new wave of immigration will be dissolved as all the previous ones did?
Okay, thank you. And the third question on the side here.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mindy Reiser, a number of affiliations that are relevant. With regard to the sociologist, I want to ask you about the impact of foreign educational institutions that have decamped to the former Soviet Union in Russia, setting up colleges, opportunities for MOOCs, all sorts of internet-enabled education. Can this meet some of the challenges? I like the point that the entrepreneur made about circulation of information, developments in software, other intellectual breakthroughs. So some of that is recirculating, but I think you were arguing that the basic capital infrastructure of higher education has declined, and I think you'd probably say that additions or increments won't replace it. I'd like your comment on that.
Why don't we start with that, and then we'll have the whole panel.
Okay, well, history repeats itself. There have been waves when young Russians were sent abroad, starting from the times of Peter the Great. And today's Russians are as thirsty, maybe even more thirsty for, cutting-edge knowledge as ever. And recently there was a very interesting story when the daughter of Putin's press secretary, Mr. Peskov, who lives in France, reported that she loves Paris, she loves to live there, and she would never study in Russia. Well, there are some good places in Russia where you can study. 2 universities in which I worked for sure. But this demonstrates that the elite has their children abroad as a major asset. They invest into the future maybe for their children, unconscious of the fact that this may affect the future of the country as well, if the whole situation changes, which brings us back to the question whether this current immigration can, in some future, affect the building of the new Russia. If it changes, there is one example, for example, Sergei Guriev, who is the chief economist of in Europe today, and he was the rector of a very progressive Russian economic school, new economic school it's called. And if people are like that invited back to Russia to assist the new government, that will be a huge, huge benefit. But it's also true that significant part of this new immigration will probably be just absorbed and dissolved, because there is always a certain number of people who will not care.
Okay, the other questions were about relations between Russians who left and Russians who remain, and also the question of whether the Russians in the diaspora are able to organize themselves, or is there distrust which prevents that? So Alfreda, please.
I ask. I think that all Russian citizens are a victim of terrorist organization, of FSB, KGB, different names. And I think that really we have a problem with these skills to organize something. We have these problems, yes, and we need time, because we were in hand of terrorists during 70 years, and what do you want after that? And now we have a very good, very inspiring process. People started to organize grassroots groups in Russia. And I think that it's really a very inspiring process, because this activity changed minding of people. And people became more active and understand why it's needed election and normal courts and normal police and normal media. And they started to have demand for democracy. And this really very changed society. And its process going now. And I think that immigrants have the same problems, and we don't have skills to organize something. And I think that during the time, we do it, but we need a time. And I think then we really need experience of Europe and America, and very important to take for us European and American educations. And I think the role of this education very important for Russian citizens. It's really very important. For me, 10 years ago, I don't have experience with grassroots activity. I was not politicians, and I don't have this experience, and I need this knowledge about campaigning grassroots. And where I take information? I take information from European grassroots activists, from American grassroots activists. It's very helped me, and I think the role of American and European education are very important for Russian civil society.
Michael, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just would probably put a couple of remarks. First of all, I think we should not, the current political regime in Russia, it's not evil, it's not absolute evil regime. It's first, you can compare with the Soviet time, even like late Soviet time regime was not absolute evil. It's not like during the Stalin time. And now most of the people who is in a power, in authority, I think even Mr. Putin, they have just like a best intention for the country. They just trying to do the best very logically, what they think. They just don't know how to do it. They have in desperate situation, and they see the situation how they see do not have like good resolution. So they're trying to do something that is actually harm, for example, business or political activism. And like in Russia, most probably the reforms and changing will be from inside the elite. Because most of the people as elite actually understand that the situation is, the situation that need to be changed. Either it will be after the next term of Mr. Putin, during the next term, we don't know. And whether our, as a people who's like immigrants, skills and experience will be welcomed, I think probably the decision also will be done by people who will stay there. Because if you look at, let's say, other CIS countries, examples like Ukraine, Estonia, why people came back into the like local politics? Because they were welcomed, their experience, knowledge were welcomed. It will never come if it's not welcome. So situation needs to be changed. I think first of all, situation is it's not dark, it's not gloom. I think it's like have all the chances to improve. We definitely have some very big problems. It's an authoritarian regime, and but most of the people, even in elite, understand that situation is wrong and need to be changed.
Okay, thank you, Alina.
Just a quick point on the Ukrainian diaspora versus the new diaspora, Russian diaspora. I think the big difference is that the Ukrainian diaspora that end up in Canada and the United States, at this point, it's second and usually third generation. And these are people who left in the interwar period primarily from Ukraine. It was an ethnic migration, it was a religious migration. There was an overlap of those two factors, ethnic and religious identities. And it was relatively homogenous in that way. So, and a bit of an outlier when it comes to migration from Europe. Usually when Europeans immigrate within 2 generations, the language is lost. This is the case in the United States. And the culture is lost, meaning assimilation is a very powerful force, particularly in the United States and Canada. So the Ukrainian diaspora is profoundly different because in many of those cases, not everybody, but many, they formed communities, they kept the language, they kept the traditions, the religious traditions, etc. So this is not the case with this new migration, right? So then, of course, because they remain politically active, and then they invested the money they earned in Canada and the United States into research on Ukraine, into politics in Ukraine. So then when you had the fall in '91, they were ready. They were engaged with the politics, they spoke the language, they were ready to go back, right? Those that wanted to. And many third generation that were born in, that their parents were born in Canada or the United States went back. And this is a profoundly different kind of group than what we're talking about, which is incredibly heterogeneous, very divided on SES, socioeconomic status, religious beliefs, maybe even ethnic identities, religious identities. So I think that is the problem there, that what do you unite around? And there's, of course, potential to activate a political consciousness, if you pardon my Marxist term, but I think that is a difficult thing to do.
Sergey, you want to?
Well, I fully agree with Alina. I think
1
we're
minute.
coming to a great summary of how fascinating and complex this current immigration is. But I don't quite agree with Mikhail, who says that it will be all decided by the elites. This never happens without certain pressure from the grassroots, from the society. And the history of democratization in the 20th century, especially in Latin America, has shown that. But I do agree that Russian current political regime is not so monstrous as it was in the times of Stalin. And there are certain points where you can pressure the situation. And they always give up, unlike Stalin, they always give up when the society is active. And it's another, possibility to look at who else who lives not in Russia today, but feels part of Russia, and how they can help.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. Let me just leave you with one thought. We don't know enough about this immigration. We do know that it is of very high quality, and we do know that a country cannot sustain a loss of people at this stature without implication, without consequences. What they are, hard to say, but come back in about 18 months and we'll have better answers. Thank you very much.